Welcome, everyone. We are so honored today to be joined by Steve Cartin. Steve and I go back a few years. I don't want to
We
say
do.
how many, but we were younger once and met each other at a conference and had some time to talk with one another about our real shared passion for helping people who are in practice to be more profitable, to be more successful, and really to be more fulfilled within what they're doing. And as Steve and I got to know each other, not just at our current professions and current roles, which we'll talk about more later, I got to know a little bit about Steve's background and found out that we do share a common background of military, then career change. So, Steve, you give us just a little snippet of your background for the folks that are listening in.
Well, you mentioned the military career change. That was kind of an interesting kind of segue into my whole dental thing. When I was finishing up my military career, I was asked to write some software for a dental company that my mother worked for. And so I just did it as a favor. And they liked what we did. And just one thing turned into another. I became a consultant to that company, mostly in the marketing kind of technology area because of my engineering background, and then just kind of developed the whole interest in the dental business. Later became the CEO or the general manager of that company. Didn't have a CEO, and served them, and later went out on my own, worked for Jameson Management, managed one of their regional areas for consulting. Went back to working with that former company where I'd been general manager, and finally ended up starting my own consulting business back in 2008, and did that for 10 years before I launched my current business, Dental Office Support, which we launched at the Hinman back in March of 2018. So from engineering through the military into dental was kind of an easy go for me. And I had an interest in business, and dental was something I could really kind of wrap my head around. So that's where I've been really, work wise since about 1990.
So, dental office support, you actually support dental practices and the practitioners that own those practices with an interesting twist. Can you give us just a smidge for background on what it is that you actually provide to a dental service provider?
Yeah, so we have about 65 practices around the country. Some are very small practices, some are large groups. And when I say large groups, the largest group we have is 7 practices in the Miami area. But we take care of a practice of any size. Some are DSOs, some are uh, local practices that are owned by a DSO or that have a significant relationship with the DSO. So it doesn't matter if you're private, you're DSO, if you're small, if you're a group. We serve practices of all kinds across the country by providing, maybe I'll call it insourced rather than outsourced,
Mm.
insourced services where we bring the expert into your practice every day, into a workstation in your practice, and we get the work done that would otherwise bog practices down, or maybe they're not right now positioned to do it efficiently.
You know, we've talked at length before our session today about different ways that we see owners kind of moving from a inefficient state to a more efficient state after you've worked with them. And you and I are both honored to be able to work together with a client that we serve in our role and you serve in your role over the past many years, many years.
Right.
So I've seen and heard firsthand from them some of the things that you bring to the table, not just from the technical approach, but really that consulting background that you bring, helping them know how to implement the services that you offer through dental office support well within their practice and kind of tailor it. As you deal with dentists and practices around, where do you see owners wasting time?
Well, time is the big thing, isn't it? It's the one thing we can't get back. Uh,
Mm.
someone said a long time ago that we need to redeem the time. And so
Mm.
when I think about time, I think about, what we got to do to make the most of it. My grandmother used to get these S&H greenback stamps at the grocery store, and every few months we would go over to the S&H Greenback Redemption Center, and we would redeem those stamps for something of value. We would hand them the stamps over the counter. They would hand us back a baseball glove or a blender or something like that. Um, so when we talk about redeeming the time, we're talking about taking that time, something we have in one hand, and exchanging it for something in the other. And so wasting time becomes
Mm.
a not only a loss, but it becomes a loss of opportunity. And when you waste time, you give something up, you give that time up, and it doesn't add to the mission, to the morale, to the maturation of the people, or to the margin. And unfortunately, the busiest person in the practice, usually the doctor, gets found squarely in the middle of those costly time wasting things.
Right.
So it's not that the doctor's in the lab playing Candy Crush on the phone or something like that. It's almost always around the matter of systems. So
Mm.
wasting time, either the doctor is the system, which pulls them into a never ending decision making process when they're trying to need to be doing other things, or there are multiple people in the practice running different systems, and that creates
Mm.
inconsistencies that require the doctor's constant intervention. So instead of leading, a doctor, a practice owner, ends up answering questions or fixing problems that really shouldn't exist in the first place. And if you're in
Mm.
the early years of your career, you can absorb a certain amount of that. But as you get closer to life's transitions, that inefficiency begins to be a compounding kind of thing. It starts draining not just time, but in doing so, it devalues all the things over which you have a responsibility for stewardship. So at the ground level, it feels like we're getting things done because we're making lots of decisions. We're doing this, we're doing that all
Mhm.
day long. We're turning from this to that to this. It feels like we're really multitasking, but from
Right.
50,000 feet, it's clearly very inefficient.
Mm. Yeah, inefficiency can creep in a lot of times. And if you're busy doing all the things, spinning all the plates, that inefficiency can actually feel normal. Where do you see that inefficiency creeping in and feeling normal?
Yeah, it really does. Anything that you kind of do over and over really does feel normal a lot of times. And so that's part of the problem is that even though it's a time waster, it creates a lot of inefficiency because you do it over and over and over. It's hard to get yourself out of the mind of thinking, okay, well, what is really normal as opposed to what I think is normal.
Right.
So, from my perspective, in a lot of different roles, I think there are like five normal feeling inefficiencies that
Mm.
happen in a lot of dental practices. One is that new patient phone calls go to voicemail. That becomes normal. It's crazy.
Mm.
Or a practice is writing off a lot of treatment. Or the hygiene schedule doesn't grow from year to year. You're adding new patients, but you're not growing hygiene. What's the problem? That becomes very normal, it seems. And then there are just unresolved claims that are always out there. That feels normal. And
Mm.
lastly, not letting or doing things manually with a pencil and a calculator that practice management software is meant to do, the heavy lifting with. So those kinds of things feel very normal in a lot of practices. And four of those five are solidly kind of front office area things. The hygiene schedule's different, but let me address just one of those. Let's talk about those claims being out there.
Mm.
And it's a practice would almost agree that we're always going to have there are always taxes and death and unresolved claims. So
Right.
we see among our clients on average in a location about 400 claims per month being posted. So if you think about that, 400 claims per month, and and you realize that a lot of things can cause a claim to go off track at the beginning. An incomplete verification, inaccurate data entry, inadequate documentation.
Mm,
All of those things and more can cause a claim to go off track. Uh, but a number of important things need to happen to get a clean claim out the door. Now,
mm,
insurance carriers take a bad rap, and admittedly, some of it's deserved,
mhm,
but largely claims are paid when a complete verification has been obtained, properly documented, and implemented in the practice management software. It gets paid. It's almost a given it's going to be paid. Now, there's some exceptions, but we're talking 98% of the time it's going to happen.
mhm,
But it's commonplace today for practices to have a lot of unresolved claims and point their fingers at the carrier.
mm,
So anything that creates a kink in the workflow is costly. And let's just say that it's easy, and it is, for 5 extra minutes per claim on average to pile up. It might be 35 minutes on some claims, might be two on others. But on average, let's just say 5 minutes on those 400 claims uh, that should be paid 90% the first time around. Well, that is a lot of money. And if an
mhm,
insurance manager is making like $35 an hour, maybe, that represents actually $1,000 a month that's wasted just to get the normal work done that could have been gotten done properly the first time around.
mm,
So the sneaky thing is that both inefficient claims and that whole matter of systems, they chip away at the things that practice owners value. They chip away at time, they chip away at people, and they certainly chip away at margin.
mm,
And
mhm,
that's where the operational friction quietly eats away at things that are ultimately more important. The heat of that friction burns up time, it burns up opportunity, and it burns up revenue.
mm. Well, it sounds like there's a lot of room for improvement within a lot of practices that maybe just have seemed normal. But what do you see as far as the revenue that's actually lost due to either insurance or insurance claims issues like this?
Yeah, that's a great question, and because that revenue is lost in little leaks here and there,
Hmm.
it doesn't like show up with its own line item on a P&L.
Right.
So it's sizable. When you look at the data, most sources would put the loss from billing inefficiency somewhere between 5 and 15%.
Mm,
A common site folks are aware of is Doctor Bicuspid. They land it right around 10%. And I think
mhm,
that's fair. I think I would maintain that 10%, that 10%, assuming that's correct, I believe it is. I would say that 10% has two sides to it. First, that loss isn't because the dentistry wasn't done. Doctors are always trying to get things scheduled, but that loss is not because dentistry wasn't done. It's because the system for getting it paid has broken down. So
mm,
it's not a
okay,
production problem, it's a
right.
process problem. And the second side of that 10% is what it actually cost the practice. So now your team is tied up chasing claims and handling collection issues instead of serving patients, instead of filling the schedule or even answering the phone well. So that is a cost, a real cost. And that's where the real cost shows up, because it's not just lost revenue from not getting paid, it's lost opportunity to pick up the phone
Mm,
and
mhm,
schedule a new patient. You can't do that when you're in the middle of a 20-minute call with an insurance carrier.
right.
So an opportunity to build, or it's lost opportunity to build patient trust with clean financial systems, rather than trying to buy patient trust by writing off services. It's just a crazy way of trying to get back to where you should be. Or it's even lost opportunity to build relationships with patients while the software does the heavy lifting. There are things can get very hectic in a dental practice. You're up front, all of a sudden, 3 patients show up at the front desk at one time to check out. And that's not when you want to be taking a pencil and a calculator to revise a couple of treatment plans and give patients some good faith estimates. You need to be engaging with the patients. You need to be building value, building goodwill, so that that next visit is more guaranteed, is happily scheduled. So so let's agree that that if you lost 10% of revenue due to inefficient insurance management, that the scarier reality of that 10%, and let's call that 10% an expense because
Mm,
it cost something. It took money out of the cash flow. So I'm going to call it an expense. So
yeah.
by not doing the insurance management piece well, you have a 10% expense. And the crazy thing is that you bought something with that expense. You bought lost opportunity and
Hmm.
you bought lost goodwill. So now that expense just keeps getting deeper and deeper and deeper. You get further in the hole. It's not just a production problem, it's a process problem.
Right, right. That certainly makes sense, and that resonates within what we've seen. Um, where do you see a strong insurance management system? When you see that, what does that look like to you?
Well, there are a lot of components to that, Rusty. So when you have a very good insurance management system, it recognizes that the practice, the team, the doctor's reputation, and the patient all have a vested interest in things going right.
Mm, hmm.
And so nobody likes financial surprises. I don't think you do, unless it's maybe, Ed McMahon used to a long time ago show up at your door, knock on your door, and give you that
Yeah,
$100,000 check from Publishers
yeah,
Clearinghouse.
that'd be a good surprise. Sure.
Did you
Yeah,
get that one, by the way? Did he ever show up at your door?
not so far. Still waiting.
Yeah. Yeah, he never showed up at mine either. I think he lost my address. But I have had financial surprises in the form of an invoice or a statement that comes to my door that says, in my mind and in the discussion that was had at a practice, I owed $120, and
Mm,
now all of a sudden the statement shows up and I owe 210 because now
hmm.
insurance didn't get paid. And so those are the kind of surprises we're talking about here. They're
Mm,
different from the good surprises. They drain time. They negatively impact the morale of the team
right.
because now they're spending time chasing answers from carriers. They're doing things that are difficult to do that shouldn't have to be done. And those surprises also hit the patient directly in the pocketbook. And they shape how patients feel about the practice, about whether they trust you, whether
Mm,
they're going to
wow.
recommend others. I mean, we don't recommend our family and friends to places that surprise us with financial things.
Mm, right.
And so
Oh, I know. Yeah.
it really begins to impact the practice and the ongoing livelihood and growth of the practice. Now I'm going to give you an illustration, and I'm going to use the word money in this illustration. But when I do, Rusty, I want you to think about other things rather than money. I want you to think about reputation.
Mm,
I want you to think about team morale. And I want you to think about bandwidth for growing and even patient satisfaction. So I'm going to say
yeah.
money here once or twice in what I'm about to say. But when I do, I want you to think about all those important things: reputation, team morale, bandwidth for growing, patient satisfaction, not just the financial component. So,
Right.
so here goes. There are only two reasons, and two reasons only, why patients owe a dental practice money. Number one, you didn't collect an appropriate patient portion at checkout. So
Mm,
that's one. And or could be number two as well. Number two, you expect insurance to pay something that it won't.
Mm-hmm.
So here's what's interesting. There are also two things that prevent that from happening. First, you need an exhaustive insurance verification with coverage, with processing guidelines, administrative details, patient history, remaining benefits, and the correct fee schedule. And second, that plan has to be entered into the practice management software in detail to include exception tables with a clean, predictable PDF that your team can look at, review for just 30 seconds before they finalize a treatment estimate. So, when it comes to insurance management, we are definitely in one of those garbage in, garbage out situations. If you don't have the right thing going in, there's only two reasons why they owe you money. It's because you didn't collect the right amount of money, or you expect insurance to pay you something it's not going to pay you. And if you don't have the right input on the front end of that conversation, the back end of that conversation is way more costly to
Mm-hmm.
manage. And so you get this garbage in, garbage out situation. And just, you've seen it. You drive down the highway and you get to this big patch where there's just garbage everywhere. It's obviously something blew off of a truck, or something blew out of somebody's trunk or something. So, like the garbage that you see scattered on the highway, when something falls off a truck, it takes a lot more time to clean it up than it
Mm.
would have taken to secure it properly in the first place.
Yeah,
So,
that makes sense.
getting
I
it
know that.
right on the front end, yeah, is
Right.
the answer to not having to spend a lot of time on the back end. Very expensive time on the back end cleaning it up.
Well, whenever you're going to have to clean something up that really should have never been there in the first place, it's going to take up staff time for sure.
Yeah.
As you're looking at a practice, do you see spots where practices are maybe overly dependent on particular staff for what they're doing currently?
Yeah, that's definitely a big player here, Rusty. In the corporate world, and even in small business, you can purchase what's called key person insurance, and that's
Mhm.
an insurance policy you have on that person to sustain the business through troubled times. Let's say the
Mhm.
leader, the CEO, the owner, the president dies or disabled.
Right.
In a similar way, that key person risk exists in a dental practice, but it goes beyond death or disability. It's not just am I worried this person's going to die or this person's going to be disabled. It includes something that's far more common in dentistry, and that is someone leaves.
Mhm.
Maybe they just walk out after a bad day, and that key
Mm.
person takes with them all the systems, maybe in their head. In
Right.
the back part of the office, it could be a trusted assistant, or it could even be a long term hygienist.
Mhm.
Now, up front, some say, well, that's got to be the office manager. That's a little harder to pin down because office manager means so many things in so many different practices. Some offices, that's just a title for the most senior person. But when
Right.
you get to that person who is filling what we call the insurance coordinator role, now we're talking about something that's more consistent from practice to practice. If
Mm.
a
Mhm.
practice is totally fee for service, accepts no insurance, that's one thing, but very, very few of those out there today. If a practice is involved in insurance networks consistently, whether that's a small practice, a large group, these roles look very similar. And that is someone that needs to be involved on the very front end of the revenue cycle all the way to the back end and know what's going on. So when that person disappears, even temporarily, it can create real anxiety for the doctor or anybody else that's trying to hold things together. So A doctor can lose a capable insurance coordinator, uh, and that coordinator, like the doctor we talked about at the beginning, who is the system,
Mm-hmm.
that capable insurance coordinator has become the system for insurance coordination. So when they lose that person, they lose a lot. That person knows the employer plans that are routinely in and out of the practice. They know the nuances of the networks the practice is in. They know the credentials for getting into the carrier portals. I mean, everything
Right. Right.
walks out with that person, and so then one day they're gone, and no one knows those
Mm.
passwords. They can't get into those portals. Nobody can download the EFTs to process the payment. No one knows how to enter plans in the software, submit claims on this new claims processing software. So that person just walked out the door with all that knowledge.
Mm.
And you see, prior to that, it felt efficient because that person was getting the job done.
Right.
And it feels efficient until it's not, you know? And if that person's out for a week, leaves the practice, or gets overwhelmed by growth, things start to slip, claims slow down, AR increases. Now, suddenly the doctor realizes how dependent everything was on that key person you mentioned. And worse, it's like someone has slowly begun turning the spigot off for the cash flow. It's
Yeah.
not just insurance revenue that's tied to claims that are not going out and getting paid, because all too often practices have told patients, well, we'll wait to settle this, settle your account until the insurance comes back. So it's not just the insurance portion many times that's shut off in the cash flow, it's the patient portion as well. When insurance AR piles up, patient AR piles up on top of that.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's a double-edged sword, really. Um, so I like to compare that insurance coordinator role to like the conductor of a symphony. Uh, the best conductors aren't the soloists who steal the show. They're the
Mm.
people who have a working knowledge of all the instrument families and how to direct those instruments and how to pace them, and ultimately how to create the most memorable effect on the audience. And so we're going to call the audience the practice. So that's what that insurance coordinator is there for. She knows all the ins and outs. And she's not the person who does it, or maybe it's a he, is not the person who does it. That insurance coordinator is the person who coordinates all of the things so that it has the best effect on the practice. And so the goal is not to remove people, great people, from the process. The goal is to build solid systems
Right.
that allow great people to flourish every day without undue stress. And that's what creates stability. It creates scalability, and that's
Mm-hmm.
tremendously important. And it ultimately protects the value of the practice when you have gotten a conductor of the symphony and not a solo violinist, you know.
In the exit planning world that I often work in, that whole idea of building systems and processes that transcend an individual is a key, whether it's the owner, the doctor who's become that system, or maybe a key person within the practice. And if that's not done, it sounds like it creates a lot of risk from what I'm hearing. There's certainly a revenue risk, a reputation risk, and all these other risks that really can mount up in tangible economic, but also in real human capital ways. What are the risks that you see? What does it create not having these systems in place?
Well, let me just kind of back up and play off of the example situation I gave you of an insurance coordinator walking out, leaving. So here's a real world example of that very thing. I'm thinking of a practice where an insurance coordinator was excellent, but everything ran through her. She had the portal logins on a spreadsheet that she owned. She understood the ins and the outs of the major carrier networks. And she even fixed claims that other people had submitted incorrectly. But instead of training the team to do things correctly, she just solved all the problems herself. So over time,
Mm,
she became a very valued member of the team in a kind of a narrowly defined way of defining value. She became a very valued member of the team, but all that knowledge stayed in her head, you know? So then some health issues came up and she missed a few days. Then she had to take a leave of absence. These are real situations. This is a real situation. And almost immediately things began to unravel. Claims fell behind. No one knew how to step in, and the doctor just simply wasn't getting paid. The checks
mhm,
quit showing up at the mailbox. So what made it worse was the timing. It happened right around a holiday slowdown.
mm,
So there was no production during that
mhm,
long holiday period. There were no collections rolling in from that missed production. And worst of all, there was no system for recovery.
mhm,
It's like a computer that just hard dies. It
mhm,
can't, you've lost everything in it, it can't be recovered. And that's the risk.
mhm,
When one person is the system, the whole operation becomes pretty fragile.
mm. Right.
And the truth is that it's not a people problem, it's a systems problem. Now, to his credit, the doctor who called me realized that right away. You know, he told me he had wished he had taken a different road months early when the first signs of slippage began to show up. So the team had, at that time, the team had been split kind of simply. One lady handled all financial and insurance things, the other lady handled scheduling and patient care. So now suddenly they were 50% capacity staff
Mm,
wise for administrative functions. They were at 50% capacity, but that one person was now working, doing the work of two people. And worse, she had no idea how the other half of the work was done.
right. Right.
So when one person is the system, losing that person doesn't just create stress, it creates a lot of it for sure, but it exposes how little systems you really had in the practice.
Well, that's a lot of stress being put on a system for an individual person. And it sounds like all of that is within that sphere of operations. How do you see operations actually affecting value, Steve?
Well, other than leadership, operations really stands out as the most direct driver here in a dental practice's value because operations determines two key factors related to the bottom line. Number one, how consistently and how effectively are, I'm sorry, I shouldn't say effective, how consistently and how efficiently production turns into collections. When it
Mm,
comes to consistency, you want to know that when you put an appointment on the schedule, it's going to move the needle forward.
right.
And every appointment's different. It'd be crazy to think that you could schedule a patient and just kind of in a shot in the dark kind of thing. We're going to put them on the schedule and see if it sticks. Well, that would be crazy. Um, but a process says I'm going to put a patient on the schedule, and out of this 1 hour, 90-minute time slot, I am going to get a certain amount of production. I know this is going to happen. That's going to be a little up and down, but I can depend on. I put a patient on the schedule, I get production, I get paid. That's a process. So
Right.
when a patient phones your practice for an appointment, uh, there's some kind of almost like machinery that needs to kick in, some operations that need to happen like a, a well-oiled machine, let's call it.
Hmm. Hmm.
And if any of those steps go awry more than once, it needs to be addressed so that it doesn't happen again. So it doesn't become an impediment, a kink in the workflow. Those impediments waste time, they waste money, morale, they waste goodwill. And
Right.
so
Right.
operations need to move smoothly and efficiently, and kinks need to be dealt with. Okay. So here's an example I love to give, and it kind of rings true with everybody. Imagine that you or I are just average consumers. We know nothing about dentistry, okay? And we're standing across the street from two dental practices. Now, and we're going to count the patients going in and out of the both practices all day long. Now, both practices have one doctor. Both practices have two hygienists. Dr. Turtle, we'll call him, owns practice A, and 21 patients go in the practice that day. Dr. Hare, he owns practice B, and he sees 30 patients, nine more than Dr. Turtle saw. So you and I do a little math on the street, and we conclude that Dr. Hare's profitability is about 43% higher than Dr. Turtle. That's the difference in 30 over 21. And with two hygienists and 29 patients, we know that practice B doesn't have many high production appointments. Now, you and I don't know that as consumers, but the reality is if you've got 30 appointments with two hygienists and a doctor, there's not many high production appointments there. The doctor's time is spent removing sutures, doing reviews, doing
Mm-hmm.
small tooth surface fillings. The reality is Dr. Turtle's profit is likely 50% higher, even though he's
Right.
only seeing 21 patients. The other doctor's seeing 30. And not only that, Dr. Turtle hasn't had the expense or the stress of turning rooms around nearly as much as the other
Mm-hmm.
doctor.
Right.
And Dr. Hare's staff hasn't been able to spend any time with their patients like Dr. Turtle's staff has. When I worked for Kathy Jameson, she had a quote I'll never forget. And she said, the goal in dentistry is to have a full schedule, but with as few patients as possible each day,
Mm.
and to deliver as much dentistry as appropriate on that schedule. So, what you're looking for is you're looking for big appointments, full schedules, doing all the appropriate dentistry you can. That is a system that translates into profit. And and operations is king there. It rules. That is, you've got to have the right system up front when the phone's being answered. You got to have the right scheduling protocols. You got to have the right insurance management. You got to have the right treatment coordinates. You got to have put all those things together. And so when you do that, the operations begins really to turn that practice into a machine where there's less stress. Patients are happier. They get more time with the team members, and it's just better all around for everybody.
I know, Steve. Just for me personally, the my dentist. I don't know, probably started going to that practice 20 years ago. Um, that practice dentist was probably mid-career. She ended up going towards latter part of her career, brought in an associate who ended up becoming the practice owner. She's gone now. She's on vacation all the time
Right.
and is loving her life. And they had
Absolutely.
a really good transition. I'm still there. Other patients, as far as I know, are still there. I know that when we look with clients at transition, it's not always that seamless. Tell me, what do you see that makes a practice easier to transition?
Well, we've been hammering away at this matter of systems, and I'm going to stick right there because a practice is so much easier to transition when it runs on systems rather than personalities. You
Yes.
can transfer systems in with a turnkey kind of thing. You can't always transition personalities. And
Hmm.
so the more that day-to-day success depends on clearly defined workflows instead of specific people, the smoother the handoff. So, as you might expect, we've worked with practices before they transition, practices who are in the middle of a transition, or even after a transition. and sometimes a client sells to a corporate. We've been in all phases of that, and
Right.
we've got one such client who did this more than 4 years ago, and we're still working with the offices they purchased. Um,
Hmm.
so and sometimes DSOs have their own way of doing things, and we see a lot of DSOs today. Particularly, it seems like they're more what would be aggressive in purchasing pediatric practices than any other.
Hmm.
But so we've seen all of this kind of play out with DSOs acquiring practices, individuals, associates like you're talking about buying the practice. So change management is a big deal, and if you're dealing with all the transitions of a new practice and the added change management that comes into inserting new people into the process because someone didn't like the transition, they left, it wasn't what they wanted to do the rest of their life, now you're dealing with a lot of change. There are a lot of things change. So uh, there are some things that we can learn from all this, and that is that the more you can um, confine that management of change to a smaller plate of work that the new owner has, so much better things are going to move forward. You won't, as a new owner, you want to be able to pick it up things and then move forward. You don't want to be having to clean things up. As the exiting owner, you want something you can hand off that somebody can say, "Oh, okay, I need to turn the key, I need to press the button, get started, and off we go."
Right.
So that may seem simple, but the reality is you build those systems before you want to transition, not 6 months, before your sell date. You begin building those systems 3 to 5 years before, so that you've got something clean,
Right.
easy to hand off. And it ultimately comes down to this: can the next owner step in and run the practice on day one without guessing how things work? That's
Right.
that's the key.
So, Steve, as we finish up our conversation today, we do a lot of work with that 3 to 5 years out, all the way through transition for dental practice owners who are wanting to sell their practice, and of course have what we call max exit. They want to be as successful with the handoff as possible, receive the greatest reward for the efforts that they've poured into it over time. I know that those dentists, those practice owners are really at their top of their game, uh, that's impacted by their leadership and their stewardship of their practice. Why don't you share just some closing thoughts about how that impacts performance and transition and all of those things from your perspective and years of seeing this much more up close than I do?
Yeah. Well, thanks, Rusty. So you're using the terms leadership and stewardship, and those are both very good and appropriate terms. I'm going to modify that a little bit to say leadership and management,
Hmm.
because in stewardship, that's what we're talking about. We're talking about being good stewards of what we have, managing those things in such a
Right.
way that they grow or they flourish or they provide, real life satisfaction. So I'm going to talk about leadership and management. Ken Blanchard, who wrote The 1 Minute Manager and is author of something called situational leadership, that's been highly
Hmm.
successful for decades. He says that leadership and management are really two sides of the same coin, and and I believe that's so true. Uh, few are the dentists who could honestly say they only lead and someone else manages.
Hmm.
The
Right.
nature of most dental practices is that while we acknowledge the owner is the key leader, we understand that this leader lives and works in very close proximity to all that's going on, and it's hard to escape being a manager. So it's
Hmm.
leadership and it's management.
Hmm.
So leadership reduces that key person risk we talked about.
Right.
When knowledge gets documented and shared, the practice becomes resilient. And when it isn't, one departure can destabilize the entire operation. So it's a matter of leadership. And then all of that ties into long term value. Buyers, they don't just evaluate revenue, they evaluate systems. Predictability is big, and transferability. So a well-led practice runs on processes, not personality. And in that sense, leadership creates financial optionality tomorrow. You
Mm.
know, if
Hmm.
I'm leading correctly, I'm giving myself a number of good options tomorrow. It gives the owner the ability to scale, to slow down, to sell, and to do all that on their own terms rather than be forced into a decision by operational strain. Now, on the other side, that management part, remember, leadership's one side of the coin, management is the other, or we'll call it stewardship. And
Hmm.
that's the day to day expression of responsibility over what's been entrusted to you, your time, your people, your systems, and then even opportunity. So, stewardship shows up in how a practice or an owner manages time, and attention to the details that are going on. So instead of allowing inefficiencies to consume the doctor and the team, stewardship means building systems to protect it. Uh, Clean schedules, accurate verification, streamlined financial processes. Time reclaimed from chaos can be reinvested into patient care, team development, or even strategic growth. So, stewardship involves developing and multiplying people. And so, you don't want your practice to rely on one hero.
Right.
You need your training to be intentional, your knowledge to be documented, and team members then get equipped to grow in skill and to grow in responsibility. So that reduces the fragile nature of the practice that you're handing off. So here's the big point: systems and performance will always lag in an environment that's not primed with team development.
Mm.
So
Hmm.
if you're not focusing on developing your team, you are going to be not focusing on systems. You're going to be not focusing on performance. The stewardship of the people requires that we have clear systems so they know the boundaries for operating and we can
Right.
have success at the next level. But if systems are all over the place, the development of people is going to get exponentially complicated. So, in my mind, systems and stewardship go hand in hand. The systems are the things that allow us to make the most contribution to our team, to our growth, our scalability. All of those things work together so that we can manage the the resources that have been brought to us. Okay, so stewardship, lastly, maybe is financial integrity that we have and the follow through on behalf of the patient. That's that would be what I would say is a good definition of stewardship for a dental practice. Doing the financial things with integrity and following through on behalf of the patients because it's the patients we serve, right? And then that stewardship aligns with the future. A practice that is, when you do those things, the practice that is stewarded well, managed well, is easier to transition tomorrow. Clean systems, reliable data, and a capable team create those options, whether that means expansion or a partnership or even an exit. Stewardship does that. And so when we think of a steward, we think of one who, when all is said and done, has been found faithful. Faithful with the people they've been given, faithful to take care of the patients that have come their way, faithful to handle the financial things. So when a person looks in at a dental practice and makes an evaluation of that, yes, the doctor's name is over it, but what they're trying to decide as a consumer is this a place I can trust? And if the overwhelming um, appraisal of patients is this is a trustworthy practice, that's going to be the overwhelming appraisal of a potential buyer or
Mm,
someone that's coming in to be a partner in the practice, because it's something that can be trusted. So we need to lead, we need to put the right people in the right places, but we need to manage well. We need to steward well, and that is to give them the right things, the right tools, so they can do their jobs, do them effectively, and the needle does get moved forward. So, um, stewardship answers a simple but weighty question, I think, and that is, am I managing this practice in a way that multiplies its value over time? And if the answer to that is yes, then both the present and the future are strengthened.
mm. Well said. Steve, thank you for this intro into systems management mastery. You are truly the system master for this world. Any doctors that are out there who are faced with things like this on a regular basis and not really sure how to proceed, we're going to make sure that we have your contact information available to them. Thanks for sharing your time. Thanks for sharing your expertise and your experience, the real world experience of grinding it out. I appreciate you being here.
Well, Rusty, I appreciate the time. It's always fun to talk about this. There's a lot of things involved in dental practice, but doing it well provides a lot of satisfaction for a lot of people. The not the least of whom is the owner, as he makes his decisions for today and tomorrow.
Right. Thanks again, Steve.
All right, thank you, Rusty. Talk later.